Freeman, it's such a pleasure to be talking to you again. And the feedback of the last interview was just incredible. What is your point of view of this?
Oh, you mean why we had such positive feedback?
Yeah,
Here's I don't always know. There's a part of this that is unknown, right? That just kind of happens.
yeah,
Um, Here's a piece though of what I'm working with right now. It's allowing for that. So, it's interesting because when I do an interview, there's a tendency to want to prepare for it and think about sort of what I want to say. And I still do that. I mean, I what I did this morning is I listened to our interview again just to kind of hear what we talked about and get a sense of what we covered. But what I also want to do, and this is the hard part for me, is allow for a space between us that we can fill, like a space where we can meet that isn't
yeah.
so tightly wound around, my agendas. And listen, I've got them. I mean, I have to really work to sort of quell the desire to control and manipulate and get what I want. Just balance it out. I mean, some of that ambition's great, but it also, when it overrides my ability to not know and discover, then I find the quality in my life, the quality of my own personal experience, goes down.
Yeah, and I fully agree with you. And it's quite interesting what you just say. This need that you have of controlling,
Hmm.
which is really something that I would like you to elaborate a little bit more here because it just seems not be you at all. And I don't
No,
know why, but
it's. Oh, you mean that it's not your perception of me? Is that what you're saying?
no,
Oh, that's
completely not.
interesting. Well, good. I mean, good, bad is sort of a judgment, and I don't mean it that way. But I'm thrilled because here's what I've been working on for a very long time, and I'll even put it in a broader context. Look, you and I grew up in the Western world in a chauvinistic mindset where vulnerability and weakness. Vulnerability is seen as weakness. Vulnerability is seen as weakness. It's not weak. That actually is a big flaw in the chauvinistic mindset. And the chauvinistic mindset um, doesn't allow much space for creativity and inspiration. It's very tightly wound around command and control, about domination. It's very tied to logic and reason. And so, I feel like much of my life, and I even feel like there's a collective through line right now where there's a lot of not just men and women, really trying to negotiate with chauvinism, because chauvinism isn't just affecting men. It castrates men and it disempowers women. And men and women alike are caught in this over identification with this sort of aberrant masculine. The masculine principle is fine. It's where it's gone awry, where we've over identified with masculine. I don't mean male, by the way. These are just energies. Masculine and feminine are just energies. They need to be in balance in both men and women, or we're really in trouble. So what's happened is the feminine aspects or qualities. What that is it's this. It's creative. It allows for. It's an opening. It's an unfolding. It is space. It is the space that the masculine energy, when it's idealized, the idealized masculine energy, comes in and it fills the space. And see, the two of them work together. And many of us, and I'm speaking now really about myself, I have had an imbalance where I was taught to, feelings and these innate powerful aspects of myself, I was taught to distrust and discredit. And so what I did personally is I found acting. I found art, any kind of art, but acting was sort of the main one that I went to because it allowed me permission to have these aspects of myself that I didn't feel I could have in much of my life. In fact, I've said before that when I was acting, I felt more real, more honest, more alive than I did in my everyday life.
That's really so interesting what you said, especially with this balance between feminine and masculine aspect of ourselves. But also, it is really a dance of energy, isn't it? in ourselves,
Yes,
but also in a relationship with our intimate partner, of course, but also with our colleagues and so on. And it's always having the two parts, the masculine and feminine, working together. And sometimes one will be more in forefront because we need to take action, we need to make things happen. And sometimes it will be just to allow it and create and be playful.
I agree with
It's
you.
great, yeah.
Yeah, no, but the truth is, in our culture today, there tends to be an imbalance. And in my experience, I'm acutely aware of the imbalance of we have really over-identified with doing, with the doing aspect, which is very masculine, and we haven't allowed enough space for the being aspect because this feminine energy is what gives the doing context. It's what makes it so lots of us are doing, but we don't really understand the deeper why of why we're doing what we're doing. That isn't really what's going on. So there's this incessant drive to keep producing, keep doing, keep taking action, and that really is ineffective if there is not space for contemplation, for allowing, for not knowing, for discovering. You say, "Well, I haven't discovered it yet." I'm thinking, I'm pondering, and I'm considering it. I don't know yet. And immediately, at least in sort of how I view the culture, you're looked at like you're an idiot. Get it together, figure it out, make a quick decision. But I don't know how to. I don't know what I feel yet. I haven't really thought it through. I haven't really allowed for, something, some piece that maybe I need to consider. See, that's very feminine energy. And so when the two work together, we find ourselves being very effective, very effective. Whereas when the two of them are clashing, we become ineffective. I'll give you a little science piece, and I think you'll like this from the quantum physics world. I'm preparing an interview that we have, I think it's next week, with Lynn McTaggart, who wrote The Field and Intention Experience, and she's written this beautiful new book called The Bond. And I was reading about a coherent state. It's not the first time, by the way, I've read about this, but this time I was really thinking, wow, because they talk about coherence. I also had the opportunity, and I'll just throw this in, to discuss. We talked to Howard Martin of HeartMath, and they've been measuring coherence in the heart. And it really is very similar to what I'm talking about here. So going back to the coherence, the way Lynn McTaggart explains it is there's this scientist who discovered light particles, photons, in us, in all matter, but in us. And prior to him discovering this, it was thought that there was not light inside of our bodies, that living things didn't actually have photons within them. And he was able to measure and identify that photons are actually going on inside of living organisms. I think they took potatoes and, like, I don't know, cucumber seeds or something, and that's what they found it in originally, and then they were able to extrapolate and so forth. So here's what's important. When light particles, when photons are working together, when it's a constructive pattern. They're S waves. They're like S waves. When they're working together, they become very efficient and they produce a lot of energy. And very few particles can create an incredible amount of energy when they're working together. When they're destructive, when they're in a destructive pattern, in other words, they're colliding or they're not working together, they cancel each other out. And so what we're talking about here is this state of coherence where energies are very much working together. And when those energies are working together, it's incredibly powerful. So the reason I bring that up when we talk about masculine and feminine is to parcel them out is an error. They are inherently bound to one another. And that's the fundamental principle of a coherent state. You can take particles that have been in this sort of coherence apart. You can take them away from each other, and they stay connected. It's a very interesting. I won't go into the quantum stuff because truly I'm not a scientist, but it doesn't matter. As I'm reading this, I'm going, oh my gosh, I talk about this very same thing about how we in our lives, when we find ourselves ineffective, when we find ourselves bumping up against things that don't seem to be working, it's because some part of us is in conflict with that. Some maybe unidentified part of us is blocking us. We don't think we deserve it, or we don't think we can do it, or we're scared, or it's going to betray some agreements we have with our family of origin, whatever it is. Some aspect of us energetically is bumping up against our best intention, our intention that's so wonderful, what we do want. Well, some part of us is actually going a different direction. And what that's doing is it's canceling out a lot of that positive energy. This is why I said to you last time we talked about it, the principle of law of attraction is, yes, we draw to us what we focus on, but we have to be aware of the part of us that is unconsciously, this sort of shadow aspect, this disowned aspect that's having a profound impact on our experience. We need to pull that in and keep it close, because if we don't, it's going to run amok. It's going to screw up our best intentions.
Yeah, completely. And what was funny, because when we talked about this, the masculine side, which is really making things happen or destroying things more accurately, and
Well,
then
not more accurately.
our
You're right. You just did something really interesting, because there are two sides. When it's in alignment with the feminine, it becomes constructive. When it is pulling away from the feminine and denying the feminine, it is destructive. So what you just said is exactly right. Thank you. Is that it's not, it may be more accurate that there's a lot more destruction, but I don't know if that's actually true. It's the potential for both. So we need to pull in the part of us that wants to do, and bring it back in alignment to why we're doing what we're doing, so that our energy becomes more constructive. So I don't know if you meant to say that, but that was a really good distinction right there, that the energy could go either way.
Yeah, and it's not exactly what I meant to say, but it's probably the same thing, but in a different way. What I wanted to offer here is that the masculine is really taking big things and making them small and makes them
Mm,
happen,
mm.
whereas the feminine is really, yeah, and then be able to express it after.
Yeah,
And
you broke up a little bit, but let me jump in there, and because I think I'm getting what you're saying. What you were saying was the masculine is taking the little things and making them happen. The feminine is considering the possibility, just considering the larger context, the big possibility, and it's the feminine allows for a kind of opening where the masculine can come in and fill it. In other words, the masculine can come in and do it. But that you have to have that side of a bigger vision, a greater vision for our lives. That is really important.
yeah, completely. But when we go in the feminine also, it means that we are far more exposed because it is really opening. It's really opening the core of who we are. So there is in our culture, and you are right to frame this before, this scare of being vulnerable too much
Mm,
here. We're opening too much. So that's why we put a mask again, and then we do things so that we don't let anything come to us.
right.
It's funny.
Yeah, no, it's tragic actually, because we're cutting ourselves off from this vital piece of our experience. The idealized masculine only makes sense in the context of its relationship to the idealized feminine. Otherwise, things become profoundly imbalanced. And I think, honestly, the crisis in our environment, in the economic world, we talked about that last time, so many of these are really representative of the imbalance, this sort of effect of chauvinism. And I don't want to just bash chauvinism, because I don't want this to be a reaction. Chauvinism, in a kind of dysfunctional way, but I mean, it did function. It built empires. It did serve a function, but it's a way of operating that's kind of run its course. And so, it's great that logic and reason, by the way, is a piece of this. So the idea that we became very logical and very reasonable, that's all in the very masculine, archetype and in or energies. In the feminine is mystery, is not knowing. And the two have to be woven together. We have to have a certain kind of knowing and a certain kind of not knowing operating at the same time. We talked about this in the last interview, that it's not an either or, it's a both and. And so when you talk about vulnerability, because this has been really important for me, is I did grow up believing my sensitivity, my vulnerability was a weakness, and yet I couldn't help it. That's who I am. So I found expression again artistically. So I got to have my feelings, and I could do that in the context of a character I was playing, versus having to deal with it in my actual life, though it was coming up in my actual life. That was just my outlet for it. So that's how I found expression for it. But that it is very fundamental to who I am now, that I hold my vulnerability as dear, is a major part of my personal growth work, and it continues to be.
Yeah, and if you allow me to paraphrase a little bit what you said,
Hmm.
maybe say this a bit differently, is that your your vulnerability, it's a difficult word for me to say as a French guy, and your feminine aspect is really your expression, but your masculine is your presence and your rooted. And having the both together allow you to be in this place of power where you can express yourself, isn't it?
Yes, everything you just said is right. It's a little the way I view it is the way I view it is a little different. The presence is the feminine. The expression is the masculine. The expression is what is the form it takes, is the expression part. But what's underneath it and the allowing for that, the expanding of the feminine aspect is allowing more permission, more wondering, more considering, more. It's got a whole quality to it that opens things up.
Mm. Yeah, and I agree with you completely here. Yeah. And we need to have the both. We need to have this because it's like electricity. We need to have the two sides and
Yeah.
to generate energy completely. And sorry, go ahead.
No, just
Go ahead.
one little piece is that what we find right now is if we recognize the imbalance, the tendency is to rush in the other direction. And that's actually perpetuates the imbalance so that it's really about both. And I just want to make that point. I mean, I'd like to think of a way to illustrate it more clearly, but just the idea that much of my own ineffectiveness has been this reaction to this sort of distorted masculine expressed as a male as macho, right? And that machismo and my desire not to be that reaction actually disempowered me. It cut me off from, this vital quality of being able to manifest something. So what I've had to do is get the context of what I want to manifest, that feminine aspect or quality, infused with a sense of ability to go do something and to, uh, achieve and so forth and so on.
Yeah, completely. And if you allow me, I will just share also what happened to me because I was really going in reaction with my dad, who was really a macho, and he was controlling the family, and you couldn't say anything. And I said, for me, I will never be like him. So I
Mm-hmm.
went completely on the other side of the spectrum and became feminine, but
Mm-hmm.
also masculine, but in the very light masculine, so the serving, which doesn't really have this presence and doesn't have this yeah this rootness and that was missing in my first relationship and then I went completely to the extreme and I went too much on the masculine side until now I can embrace both and I'm happy with both and I know I can do both and that's when I think fulfillment is there. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's not a the thing we talked about last time, which is really important, is it's not all the idea of balancing is that it is like a wave. It goes up and down. It's not all the imbalances are always there. It's very and we have these moments of synchronicity where energies are aligned and we find ourselves in a state of flow, right? But we can't will that. We have to kind of discover it. That's again a great illustration where masculine and feminine meet. That every time I've had a flow experience, I've wanted to bottle it. That's a very controlling. Like I want to. How do I do this? And the truth is, you don't do it. You kind of discover it. I mean, there has to be some action, something you're doing, sure, of course, but there has to be an appreciation for what might come out of it, the organic piece, the sort of allowing piece. And then we find ourselves sort of miraculously in this state of flow where we're in coherence, where the energies are aligned. It's incredibly powerful. And all manner of miracle can occur in that state. But we can't will it. We have to be willing. It's this combination of will, which is masculine, and willing, which is feminine, that come together and allow for a state of grace where something just comes in and flows, and we go, wow, I'm so grateful for this moment. And all I can say about this is, as I've explored my feminine aspect and I've been doing this work, there are more of those moments. But every time I try to control it, every time I try to figure out how you do that, I slip and fall.
Yeah, and what you said, the state of grace, that's
Mm.
such a lovely picture. And even for gracefully embracing the power of be with the power of the universe and moving in your
Yes.
life.
Well, you said something interesting, so let me talk about this. Again, a little bit of the quantum piece, though I won't go too far into it, is the idea that there are frequencies. Again, that things are all operating as energy, and these frequencies align in particular ways, and that there's a field, that there's this field of energy that we have access to, that we actually tap into. Again, it's allowing for that it's always present. It's our birthright. It exists at all times. This loving, supportive, our universe supports us when we get in alignment with it, which is very much what we're talking about. And it does. It operates as a field that we can tap into at any moment in time when we move through into this kind of coherence. And again, I don't want to put it in a bottle. I can tell you one piece about it. There are practices that I do that tend to support those kinds of experiences. Okay, so meditation being one of them. Lots of contemplative practices, but if I'm just doing contemplative practices all day, I mean, I don't want to go off to a cave and or and go and try to find bliss. It's this weaving in of time for contemplation and time for action, and the idea of the both kind of weaving together. So, but the field piece is what I was speaking to, that there's a field of energy. There's a field that we can tap into when we're in alignment. So this is a lot about cleaning up those pieces of us, those disowned parts, those parts that we don't want to take ownership of, owning them and becoming more coherent so we're less in conflict. Because anytime we're pushing something down, we're using an exorbitant amount of energy. To repress something is an energy zapper on a deep and profound level.
Mm-hmm. Completely, yeah. And you are probably talking here about the 0 point field, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
It's the point
yeah,
of
and
it's a point of possibility. It's a point of possibility. It's this incredible energetic potential that is that we really haven't tapped into. Haven't tapped into on so many levels. I mean, alternative energies and the idea that it can be sourced is quite profound. And yet our consciousness, because we're locked into this chauvinistic mindset, it doesn't see it. Like there's a whole range of possibility that's not that we're not aware of. It's interesting because we talk about the illusion. The problem when we talk about the illusion is the illusion, it could be an illusion, but it's very real. So we can't totally discredit it. We have to go, it's an illusion. I know it's an illusion, but it's my illusion. And thereby, it's pretty real. And last time we spoke, I talked about negotiating with this kind of, I know there's some faulty thinking. I know there's some crossed wires. I know that. And I actually have to negotiate my way through that stuff versus deny or repress it. So as I acknowledge that these parts of me exist, I have more opportunity to come back in alignment.
yeah, and the illusion, yeah, it's a great thing because we don't even know what we see today. Is it an illusion or not, or what is real here? If we go down to the quantum physics also, but also the way that our mind is interpreting what we see and
That's
giving us
exactly
some
right.
meaning. So,
And giving us
so we don't.
giving us a perceptions that this is where we go back to everything is personalized. That my reality is not your reality, and it's interesting as I own that. And I own all the things in my experience that are reflecting back to me aspects of my experience. That's the piece. So everything in my life is an expression of some aspect of my experience. If I own that, I become empowered. I take ownership of that. It still feels, honestly, like a heck of a ride. I'm not diminishing the fact that the bill came in and the this came in and the that, and I'm watching all the triggers and I'm going, wow. And in those moments, if I can breathe, if I can begin to defuse the reactive mind, right, and I can begin to be with the parts of me that are feeling scared or overwhelmed or whatever, I begin to have choices. It's the space between stimulus and response. We're conditioned in a particular way, so our conditioning triggers responses, and we don't have choice in that unconscious state. But what you and I are working on right now is expanding in consciousness. What we're doing is we're widening the gap between stimulus and response, and in that space is our freedom to choose our response. That's the gig. That's the entire gig right there. And what happens is our world begins to expand profoundly, and our limitations, we begin to the walls don't come down necessarily all of a sudden. I mean, we talked before about these kind of cracks and this composure, the way we've held it together. But enough of those cracks, and we start to see beyond it, and we start to expand beyond it, and that's very exciting.
Yeah, and yeah, it's completely exciting. And you're right, the walls doesn't crumble straight away because we need also the time to clarify what we want. So we need to experience some of the cracks. We need to experience some of the less good aspects of life, so that we can be conscious of what is beautiful in our life. And then when we're conscious, then we can say, yes, that's what I want more of.
You,
And then we start to see it.
yeah, and I love the way you're just illustrating it because it's this little bit by bit thing. So many people have come to me. We talked last time about sort of, I call it crashing the bus, where there's things kind of seem to have to come apart first before we can kind of rebuild. And while that in my life, there's been a number of times where my construct, my world as I sort of view it, constructed it, comes apart. Sort of the breakdown precedes a breakthrough, and that's true. But here's a piece that I want to say. I really offer that people don't need to necessarily quit their jobs. They don't need to necessarily leave whoever they're with. In fact, if they can be in relationship with how they've constructed this world and begin to work on themselves and integrate in a very compassionate way, a very passionate and compassionate way, it's very powerful because what the world actually needs, my world, your world, the collective, is people who can work effectively within it, where we are now. So I'll illustrate this with clients. I've had a number of clients come to me and say, I'm quitting my job. And what I've offered to them is to begin to so I often say, sure, okay. What about your job is it that you would like to see more of? What would you like to do? What are the qualities in you want to see expressed more in the world? And that's that right hand column. And then we look at the left hand side and we say, what are the aspects that you don't that are coming out that are being kind of reflected back to you that you don't like so much? And how do we pull that in? So what has happened a number of times, in fact, I had a client come to me and said, I hate my job. I want to be of service. I want to whatever. And she had all these wonderful things she wanted to do. And we started talking about her job. And oh, Bertrand, let me tell you, her job was perfect for her to do all those things. She just couldn't see it. So what she was intending to do was quit her job. And what I explained to her is, look, you'll quit your job, but you'll drag with you this big bag of stuff, and you're going to recreate it in a different place. Trust me, I've done that. Whether it was relationships or jobs, I moved the furniture around, but it was the same house. The consistent variable was me. And for years, I wanted to point outside and say, oh, it's the job. Oh, it's the woman. It's the this. It's the that. No, the one consistency was me. So when I was able to own that, then any job almost, becomes an expression of the aspect of me I'm intentionally leading with, and the parts of me that are reflected back to me that I ought to own, that I'd be well served to own. So, it's interesting. Same with relationships. I have a woman that just started with me, and she just wrote me and said, oh my gosh, we were working, and I was blaming everything on my husband, and I just saw it. She watched the video back, because I tape them, and she said, I watched it, and she goes, so much has changed. I get it. It's me. So it's fascinating. It's really fascinating. One more piece because I'm so tempted to say this. And
Yeah.
what happens with the relationship piece too, and this is kind of a different client, but she'd said to me, my husband doesn't fulfill my needs and so forth and so on. And I just said to her, well, have you thought of asking? And we sort of talked about some ways she could ask and some things. And she's like, oh, no, we could never hear it. Well, listen, lo and behold, after some length of time, she starts asking for what she wants. She starts claiming. This guy is relieved. He's like, it's so hard. I've been guessing this whole marriage, 20-something years. I've been guessing at what you want. Thank God. Thank you for telling me. And these two started to come together and they started liking each other again. It was really quite magnificent. That's not always the case. Sometimes people do, they leave, and that's fine. But oftentimes we make it about the other person, not owning that that's a projection, that the other person is playing a role in our experience, that if we own it, we let it reflect back to us, and we take it in, we become effective. And all of a sudden, we start to discover why we like the person in the first place, or why we started in the career path or the job in the first place. All those qualities come back when we start to take personal responsibility and direct our choices through the power of intention and consciousness.
Yeah, and you also say it's all a decision, and that's really what directs what we are going to live in the next segment of our life.
Yeah.
So if we have the time to respond to life, to be with the universe, instead of reacting all the time, then we have the time to say, now that's what I want to, that's what I'm intending for the next minute, next hour, next day, or whatever we want.
Yeah.
But what was really fascinating, what you said about this relationship here, is that we come back to being vulnerable here.
Hmm.
Because this lady that you mentioned, she didn't want to be vulnerable and showing her needs to her husband.
She didn't want
And
to give
he
up.
didn't.
She didn't want to give up her position. She took a position that was her way of defending the wounded part of herself. And I said to her, "You're going to have to give up your position." And it's like a light bulb went off. She went, "Oh my gosh, I totally have taken a position against my husband. I have these resentments that I fostered, and the resentments have a life of their own." And that was
Yeah.
that's a huge piece because these realize that a large part of our life, the large part of our construct, is defensive. We talked about this in regards to story last time, that we create these stories to defend ourselves, and we create agreements, like we collude with other people. We get people to agree with our story. We don't realize the price we're paying for creating that story. And we even talked last time, like there was a situation with my wife where there were 6 stories that we could tell, and all of those stories would be true. Which one did we want to tell? And what were the expressions of? Like, what part of me wants to crash this bus right now? What part of me wants to blame you? And how do I own that? And that's when things get really magical. Um, versus, I remember very loosely some of the fights my first wife and I would have. And I will tell you, a month into this sort of fight, whatever the heck that was, I wouldn't know what it was about. I mean, what we made it about, kind of thing. On a deeper level, I could tell you exactly what it was about. It was all my hurts and stuff being projected onto her. I required my first wife to be disappointed in me. I required that because it was my internal beliefs about myself that this was a must. She had to do that. And given time, I would bend and twist anything she said to make sure it was ridicule. And on some level, she agreed to play the role. I mean, she did. But that was I own it, man. I played my part to the hilt. So
Yeah, and she probably agreed to play this because she wanted to connect with you.
well,
And
she
that was
agreed. No, she agreed
one
to.
way.
Well, she agreed to play it because it matched up with her stuff. See, this is where
Okay.
we match energetically. We talked about, in a room of 1,000 people, if there are 2 people who've been abused, they'll both find each other. They're going to find each other because that's what they do. We're like magnets. We attract to ourselves, positive and negative. So we really want to be clear on what we're attracting and see what certain experiences are reflecting back to us so we can own it. And then we begin to move through it fairly gracefully, fairly quickly. We go, oh, I don't want that. And then life becomes chicken or fish. We have a choice, chicken or fish. It's not like, oh, I'm being forced to eat chicken because we can't see the fishes over there. We can't see the other options. We just can't see them. And so we feel like victims. And in that case, I guess we are. But the idea is to go, wait a minute, I own this. I have a choice. And that's that piece of possibilities where the world opens up. There's a thing I wanted to talk about. There are a lot of people in my coaching practice lately. I need to first give credit. So my partner Barnett Bain and I are writing a book together. So much of what I'm talking about is our work. So I need to say that. And this is a piece that he's really opened my mind to, and it's been coming in a lot with my clients, and it has to do with our capacities. Going back again to the chauvinism, this mindset has limited our capacities, and there's 3 of them that I want to discuss. It's imagination, desire, and expectation. We expect very little, and we get very little based on our conditioning, based on this kind of mindset. Um, and the ability to expect this sort of marvelous expecting that you find in like small children where they have this huge expectation. Like, my kids watch American Idol and they immediately expect that for their lives. I'm going to be famous. I mean, I remember expecting to be a professional basketball player, and my experiences in my life and all my disappointments and the way that was internalized and the way it was framed diminished my ability to expect much. And then desire. Even in spiritual or religious traditions, I should say, we're taught not to desire. And the idea desire is rich. You got to desire. That's the motivation. That's the wanting of the more. That fundamental capacity is going to expand our lives. And the last one is imagination. We bump up against imagination all the time. And it's like we're only recycling other people's thoughts, other people's movies, other people's, stuff until we get to our own edge where we can look beyond it and begin to imagine. This is where vision and vision work is just powerful. He's always pushing the edge of the vision. And every time I work with a client, the first couple of visions they send in, because I have them email them to me, oh my gosh, they're so limited. And then we start to expand it, and I say, what is it possible? Like, what's possible? And the minute we're in that moment of what's possible, is it possible that I could? And we just start to watch the thing, like, get as outlandish as possible. And in the beginning, it's like, oh no, I can't. Oh no, please don't make me do that exercise. Oh no, I don't want to do it. And then at the end, they're like, oh my gosh. And all of this so that it's a capacity. It's a capacity. Those three qualities are that's where fulfillment is. That's the gooey good stuff. That's what's going to really expand our lives. But me, I speak about myself because it's really my only real frame, but I see this in a larger context. Um, we have been so diminished by this conditioning, by this chauvinistic mindset, that that our capacity is limited. Our capacity, and that's the state of crisis that we're really in this world today. Is the state of crisis is one of imagination. It's one of expectation. It's one of desire. That is the painful truth. And we will not be able to imagine new ways of doing things if we stay in the old paradigm. We must evolve, and I must evolve. It's like I've hit break point. A tipping point is what I call it. But there's no possible way I can pretend anymore. I have to live my life out loud. I have to step into it. As scary as it is, as painful as it is sometimes, I mean, trust me, I feel disappointment. I go on a ride every day, but my expectation is higher. And the flip side of that is then it feels like a crash. And in some ways it is. I mean, it's like, oh, it's not going to work. And then I pick myself up off the pavement and okay, and it's the capacity for more.
Yeah, and I completely get it. And I'm probably a little bit on the same similar journey as you are. And it is scary, it is hurtful, it is different, it is completely not congruent with what we were told we can do, what we can desire, what we can have, what we should not do. But once we are here, it's just it's it's different. Life is so easy.
It
It
is.
is easy.
It
Yeah.
is. It is. That's a mindset. And then it's hard and then it's easy. It's both and. It's like in a particular way, and you and I talked about this offline a little bit, things have never been harder, and yet they've never been more rich and more powerful. And they're both. It's both and. And so our ability to sort of be with that is spectacular. No, you Bertrand are a courageous man, and courageous, as you know, comes from the French word cœur, which means
Cœur, a heart.
heart.
Yeah.
So you're coming from your heart, and that's the essence of courage: is to come from your heart and to be in that state, that vibratory state of being open and allowing.
Mhm. There's also this kind of courage to be honest
That's
of
it.
who we are,
That's
and I
it.
think that that's very really also something quite difficult for lots of people to be
It's
really
risky.
honest. Mhm.
It's risky. We're risking being rejected. We're risking because again, you go back. We talked about this last time. We have these points of reference from, let's say, our childhood, where we're little boys in our case, and something occurs that is painful, and our world didn't have our family of origin, whatever, didn't have a way of honoring that and helping us know what that was really about. So we started on that distorted perception. And then we got these stories and everyone colluded, and that became our lives. And undoing some of those stories and unpacking them and getting below the waterline, seeing what's going on a deeper level, um, is very challenging. I don't want to diminish that, and it's very frightening at first. I mean, a lot of, again, we talked about people changing the radio station. A lot of people, when I first sort of present this, it's like I see the wall go down. And I honor that. I have to meet them where they're at, and it's okay. I mean, I understand it's scary, and so okay. But as you've mentioned, once we start to like be okay with the discomfort, the upside, the opportunity is so much greater than whatever we're risking. And at some point, you tipped, and I think for you and I both, it's like there's no going back. Are you kidding me? I don't want to,
No.
sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, you say sorry. Yeah. But also, it's being honest where we are in our own journey and who we are. It's so important because if we have a desire, if we have even if we are a little bit open to what is possible for us,
Mm.
if we don't know where we start, we can't really find what is our way. Because what we tend to do then is to go in circle,
That's
and
right.
that's really the worst place where we can be. In fact,
We cycle
yeah.
back. We just cycle back again and again and again. And you know, here's a piece though. It's interesting. I've had those moments, and the kind of moments of despair where I'm cycling back and I go, "Wow, I'm here again." And I'll give you a little tool with that to offer. I offer this to folks is it's compassion that allows us to see clearly. And so compassion is a practice, and it's something we have to practice consistently with ourselves and other people. So on one hand, we have judgment, which is this sort of defensive way of framing everything. So everything fits, right? We judge it. We can then parcel it out into good and bad and right and wrong and we're very quick to do that. We don't want to leave a lot of shades of gray. And the truth is life operates in shades of gray. There aren't really, as tightly wound rights and wrongs as we think they are. We tend to, wrap our lives around. Um, so moving back into relationship with this other piece versus jumping to judgment, where we begin to see clearly, is allowing for compassion. Compassion allows us to see clearly. Judgment clouds our perception. It's interesting, too, going back to the science piece, physiologically, when we're in a state of stress, the adrenal system secretes a hormone called cortisol. And cortisol quite literally blocks, it clouds perception. That's its job, which is done in the prefrontal lobe. We call it the new brain, the neocortex. And the neocortex, by the way, they've done a lot of studies with people who are avid meditators, and they found that they actually have thickened this part of the brain. They've actually, by meditating, they've actually got a greater level to make choices. They call this part the executive planner. It's the part of our brain that makes good decisions. The the old brain, right? They often called the reptile brain, the amygdala. That's the part of fight or flight. That's where we make very quick decisions, reactive decisions. And so again, when we're under stress and we're in a state of judgment, literally we can't think properly because it's a survival mechanism. Back however many thousands of years ago, when the new brain was starting to develop, it threatened the survival of the species. Because if there's a tiger in the woods, you don't want to sit there and think about, what should I do? Like, well, there's a tiger. Here I am. What do I want to do with this? That's not a good idea. You needed to be able to react quickly. But as we've developed as a species, the idea is the potential is to evolve this new brain, which is where all manner of capacity is possible. So this is got a little scientific basis that we really want to balance our lives out with these practices. Practicing compassion is very important so that we can open up and begin to have possibility.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. And it's what's interesting that science is backing up what we are doing in meditation, and the fact
Okay.
that we have more choices is because we have the time to contemplate different choices and then go into one or the other. Whereas
Exactly.
if we are always stressed, we only have two choices. It's either I fight or either I go away.
That's right.
Meaning in a relationship, I argue or I stonewall, or meaning with my kid, I argue or I hit or I just put her into bed, whatever. And
Or
instead there are
disconnect,
others.
or I
Yeah.
disconnect from them. I disconnect from them versus going into what's the challenge and getting underneath it and really dwelling in the wisdom of what this is about as a reflection of me.
And that creates the richness of any relationship
That's it.
with any human being.
That's
Yeah.
it. That's it. That's intimacy. That is intimacy. And that's what we're striving for. Um, So yeah, we've woven all over the place. I was going to say one little piece. It's great. I mean, this is it. We knew going into this, we were kind of saying, look, we're going to just let this thing fly and see where we land. Um,
Well,
which,
the funny thing, if you allow me,
of
we haven't
course,
prepared anything,
I know.
and we didn't know what we're going to talk about,
I know.
and it just seems to flow in the right direction, or in direction.
Yeah, no, that's really great. I was going to say about the Dalai Lama. It's very interesting because the Dalai Lama, of course, is a spiritual leader, but he's very into the science, and he wrote, of course, The Universe in a Single Atom. Um, And it's interesting what we see now. We're talking about a new consciousness. We're talking about a paradigm shift, a new earth, whatever one wants to call it. Um, uh, the idea of this convergence. So it's coming from every angle, and for those who are watching this, it's time. I mean, it's time in our own personal lives, but the larger context is if we don't do something soon, we're going to be in trouble. So the idea is there's an imperative here, not just that our own lives aren't working, which I'm sure it's being reflected in lots of people's lives. Again, I've got lots of people calling me, clients who are saying, or new clients or people watching who are commenting and saying, this is great, I need this information, because they're in a state of personal crisis. So it works both ways. And again, we talked last time about how that shows up as money, but it can show up in relationships. So all these kind of things that we thought, men and women are supposed to be this way, and this is, this is how a relationship's supposed to work, and all of that is crumbling. The man's the provider, the woman's the this. That's shot. In the modern world, forget about it. My entire business collapsed, and I depend to this day. I mean, still, my wife brings in the bulk of the income, and okay. That's how it played out in our lives, and that's not good or bad. It's exactly how things are right now. So the ability to adapt and really move past those confines, those constructs.
Yes, and you say that the time is now to really shine. That's the best expression I can find. So find who we truly are inside us, find our own story, what value we can give to the world, and then take this bloody risky step, which is really, really big, but just go out. And once we are out, then we can really find ourselves. I don't know for you, but for me it was this power. I didn't know that I was so powerful.
I
I
know.
didn't know that I could do so many things, and I didn't know that I could really transform other people's life just by being different, by
And
being.
the opportunities that arise. I mean, look, I'm not even supposed to announce this, and this is not something I should be saying, but look, later on today, I'm filming a conversation between Carlos Santana and Don Miguel Ruiz. How did that happen to me? I'm just this all these things. I can't even tell you how many things have opened up. I mean, like I shouldn't even be talking about them. This part of me that says I shouldn't be talking about it. I should be. I should be going, yay, this is going to be fun. Like, how cool is that? But seriously, it's like when we start to flip, and I wanna say this because I want to illustrate it. Everything in my life is up. Everything. There is such a pushback from my universe. There are so many things that come in that scare me. There are so many ways that I doubt. But my work, the work I've done for the last 20 years, is my foundation. And at this point, I've tipped. So it can get very dark. It can get very scary. I want to offer that to people because I don't want to project that it's some kind of land in milk and honey. It's so worth it. It's so worth it. But in my experience, there tends to be a lot of pushback. And we talked about negotiating. I'm negotiating a lot of factors in my life that I'm like, wow, these things are coming up, and there's such opportunities for me to respond. Um, I didn't I don't always like that. When I mentioned that I was a real estate developer, and when my business came apart and I was facing bankruptcy and there was lawsuits and it was really nuts, it got really amplified. This friend of mine, very wise woman, Anna, said to me, "You have to be grateful, Freeman." I wanted to kill her. I was like, "Are you kidding me?" I immediately went into my victim story about I'm losing. I have to give up my car and this house, and we can't afford it. And ha ha. And she said, "Be grateful." And I was like, "You gotta be kidding!" I didn't know what she was talking about. And today, I am so grateful. Like, look, I'm not looking for more bus crashing. I don't want to do that. Thank you, but no thank you. I'm into grace and ease and things not going that harshly. But it's okay. That's the way I did it. And there's still moments where, this sort of terror of like, oh God, what do I do now? Where the construct comes rushing in and I have to negotiate something, a bill or a this. And I'm like, a taxes and the threat of an audit or I don't know. And I'm like, wow. The IRS, this is the tax organization in the United States, sent me a letter and I just feel my stomach shoot up to my nostrils and I'm sick. And I'm like, no, I'm manifesting this incredible life. No. And the fantasies start. If they're going to take everything, I'm going to have to go to jail. I mean, really, I can go nuts with this. That's not true. But I mean, it is partially true. It can go crazy. So I just want to offer that as perspective, that this is a richness where we really embrace the whole thing. And before, I was so numbed out that my perception was I could handle that letter better. And by handle, I mean, go find a bottle of scotch and, a box of chocolates or something. That was my version of handling it. I wasn't handling it at all. And it was manifesting in physical ailments. I mean, I was in a place where that old world wasn't working for me. But I don't want to pretend like these pieces are just fixed or cured. It's a serious negotiation in my life.
Yeah, and I'm really grateful that you are sharing this so openly because I'm experiencing something very similar on a daily basis. And yeah, there are days that days now for long times that are pure magic, pure in the
Mm.
flow. You wake up in the morning, it's 4 in the morning, and your eyes are open, and you say, "Wow, what I'm going to do now?" And it's just eager to go to life. And there are still days and weeks where oh, I call them the yoki days, which we not feel really very well, and it's kind of a conflict inside you, and something is kind of shifting, and you don't know what it is, and yeah, you have to take the steps. You have to be courageous and brave at this time,
And
and then
forgiving and compassionate. And here's what the deal is. This is a while ago, but I had this real breakdown moment. It was in the middle of the night, and I couldn't sleep, and I was worrying. And I came into my office, and I got on the floor, and I just curled up in a ball, and I started sobbing. And I put my hands on my stomach, and I just sat with this little boy, this little me, who was so scared and so overwhelmed, and I just held him. And it lifted. I got up an hour later and it was like, oh my gosh, I was so clear. And it was so interesting because everything I was scared of cleared up in about 20 minutes. I mean, it was like I got up at 4 in the morning. I wrote. After I got up, I wrote. And then I had to make some phone calls and I had to deal with some of these circumstances that I was so scared about. And I just knocked them down. And like it literally took like 2 phone calls. 20 minutes later, the whole thing was cleared up and I was fine. But I know why it showed up in my experience. I know I had to allow for that piece of my disidentified, disowned self to be present. And if I tell you the honest truth, that tracks back to myriad experiences in my childhood where I felt so alone, so isolated, so overwhelmed, so rejected, da 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 da. And so for me to be with that part of me that still lives in me. And here's the good news. It's the best. It's where my gold is. It's where my ability to, when I have compassion for that part of myself, my compassion in the world is huge. When I find myself judging in the world, it's me I'm judging. It is only me. And it goes, and it's so painful for right now for me to judge. I still do it. So painful for me because I'm rejecting such a brilliant aspect. It's this little boy who just needs a hug. And he needs to be loved. And he didn't get it.
yeah, mm, yeah, I get this a little bit, yeah, and but now the little boy is healed. It's getting more and more healed every day, and the man now is able to express himself
And he's
in
part of the man. He's part of the man.
yeah.
He's the part of the man. See, this is the integrated masculine. The integrated masculine in a man, it's expressed in a woman too. He's the one who can pick up the little boy who falls down and will brush off his knee and tell him everything's going to be okay. Here's how the world heals. When that little boy is picked up and cared and loved and nurtured, the world heals because again we go back to the part of me that had the experience, the traumatic experience, let's say, and what I got back from my universe was stop crying, get over it, it's not okay to feel. That imbalance is what's expressed in all the crises in my personal life and in the world around me. That's the crisis. The ability to be with the part of me that's scared and so forth and so on allows me to make constructive choices. So when I heal, I have children, you have children, my little son Antonio or Isabella, and I'm loving and I respond versus react. Respond, you said that earlier. Respond to them in a constructive way. What I'm doing is I'm changing my lineage. I'm changing the world. That's it, right there. But it starts with me. It starts with me. We talk about being co-creators. We talk about this, but we have to know something. that there is, and I'm sorry I'm getting into this now, I probably should have covered it earlier because it's a great point, that we start off very enmeshed, very dependent, and we work towards independence, which is the stage a lot of us are at, where we're actually individuating and taking out ownership, and it's mine, which allows us to then become interdependent, but which is the co-creating piece. So we go from codependent to independent to interdependent. But to get to co-creating, we have to go through the process of owning it. If we don't, what we're sometimes calling co-creating is more codependent. It's this kind of magical thinking. It's this way that we're not really empowered. We just think we are because we're trying to think nice thoughts. We talked about this last interview. That's the miss that I want to just tell people. Look, it's okay. I'm not judging. I mean, we do that. I've done it. I get it. Spiritual bypass. I get it. I don't want to deal with the stuff that's hard. But we have to be careful of that because the work is, before we can start co-creating, we have to create. We have to be creators before we can co-create. And much of our world is so codependent, we've lost our creativity. We've lost our imagination, desire, and expectation. We can't do it. So we're locked into something that we can't really think ourselves out of. So we can't reject it. We can't push it away. We have to integrate, and then we become empowered.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, and even being independent is maybe an illusion also at some stage,
Of course.
and that's maybe probably what our ego tells us. That's who you are, and you are not more than this. And in fact, it's everybody together. It's just this sea of eyes.
Well, there's only one of us here, but it's only in my experience that I own it. That's the kind of independence I'm talking about, where we actually own the experience as ours before we go and talk about the we. The I. The we, when I was born, my I, my sense of self, was attached to the we. I saw myself as the son of John and Atlanta, as Catholic, as Caucasian, as da-da-da-da-da-da, and all of those bits and pieces that made up my sense of self. The we defined me. And then as I started to grow and create a sense of self, what has happened over time is the we, the collective, is made up of a bunch of I's. But the I has to in some way identify that there's me, that there's an I. Then that changes the collective. So that's the piece I'm talking about. It's really about owning. So I say make everything personal. You know, we move to a place where we recognize everything's reflecting back to me. And then there becomes a place where we recognize there's only one of us here. That we're all totally, especially on the quantum level, this big soup of energy. And the idea that you end and I begin is a complete illusion. But that's not something we can jump to in my perception. That we can know it and kind of a sense of it and okay, that's cool. But there's still I really have to frame this in terms of how I'm experiencing it. Because in that way I can really own it. And that's how the collective changes.
Hmm. Yeah, and I agree with you. It's a journey to become a creator, or be aware that we are a creator.
That's it.
And then after it's cleaning up this communication with this field of intention or field of whatever you want to call it. Yeah, that's great.
Beautiful.
Okay, Freeman, our time is up nearly here. That was a great chat. I really loved it, and I hope we can do this together another time.
I so enjoy it. It's such a magical thing. And I love the idea that we allow permission for us to wander. I get that for some folks it's like, why didn't they write down their bullet points and talk about the 10 things? And for those folks, they can turn us off. I mean, in truth, sorry, if we did that, then it would be confined to that, and we wouldn't wander into something new or some new thought or something. It's not that exciting to be tied to those talking points. So thanks for going on the ride with me. I mean, not everyone's willing to do this, so I appreciate the fact that you are open in the way that you are.
I think it's a wild ride, and I love it because it's just we don't know where we're going, and there's so much of us here that is just being allowed to express, and that's beautiful. I think it's the most beautiful gift we can have here.
It's heartfelt.
Yeah.
Lots of cœur, right?
beaucoup de cœur.
Beaucoup cœur, yeah. And courage in both. It's the same, two sides of the same coin. Excellent.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Freeman. Okay, thank you.